Thank you, Mickey. Good morning. Buenos dias. It is truly an honor to have the opportunity to moderate this impressive panel of experts today. First, I'd like to thank Toyota for their sponsorship of today's Issue Hour. Education has always been a priority of Toyota, and their role in today's event demonstrates their commitment to our community. Patricia Salas Pineda is the Group Vice President and General Counsel at Toyota Motor North Company. Ms. Pineda works closely with Toyota's Diversity Advisory Board and was named one of Hispanics Magazine's 100 most influential Hispanics in 1994 and 2003. Unfortunately, she cannot join us today. However, we have Mr. Robert Chiappetta, Assistant Manager of Government Affairs, who will represent her in her absence. So please join me in welcoming Mr. Robert Chiappetta.
Thank you, Michelle. We're happy to sponsor this briefing. Pat Pineda sends her regrets. Unfortunately, she was not able to come today due to health reasons. Perhaps people here know that Toyota employs over 32,000 Americans, and we have invested over $14 billion in facilities across the United States. Maybe you even drive a Toyota Camry, America's #1 selling car. What you might not know is that Toyota has invested over $26 million in literacy programs in the United States. And that's been since 1991. In 2003, we launched a program specifically targeted at Hispanic families, a program where parents and their children attend school together to work on their English skills, and parents learn to support their children's literacy development. The Toyota Family Literacy Program is currently in 10 communities in LA, New York, DC, Chicago, Providence, Rhode Island, Detroit, Shelby County, Alabama, Santa Paula, California, Chelsea, Massachusetts, and Denver. And soon, in the fall, we will expand to 5 additional cities. I want to take a moment to acknowledge Sharon Darling, the founder and president of the National Center for Family Literacy. She's here in the front row. The Toyota program that I speak of is really Sharon's program, and I encourage you to meet with her and ask her questions about the program during the break. Finally, Toyota is very much committed to diversity, and while we recognize there is always room for improvement, we are proud to be recognized this year by Diversity, Inc. as one of America's top 50 companies for diversity and inclusion. Of course, our outreach toward Latino communities reaches much further than our literacy programs, and I would be happy to talk to people here about our efforts after the panel discussion. So thank you, and I look forward to the discussion.
Thank you, Robert, and thank you, Sharon, for being with us today. We will now hear from our panelists, and then we will open the floor for discussion. Our first panelist serves as the Senior Liaison for Latino Outreach at the National Education Association. Prior to joining the NEA, Rita Jaramillo served for 5 terms as Chief of Staff to Congressman Ruben Hinojosa. She holds a bachelor's in bilingual education and mass communications from New Mexico Highlands University, a master's in education from Washington State University, and a master's in public administration from the Kennedy School of Government at Harvard University. Please welcome Ms. Rita Jaramillo for an overview of the state of education in the Latino community.
Gracias y buenos dias. Thank you for being here, and thank you for being on time. That tells me that we're probably speaking to the choir. So it's a pleasure to be here and to talk about an issue that is so important to all of us. My job here is to give you an overview of the condition of education for Latinos, and my guess is that I can take any one of you and you can tell us what that condition is. But allow me to give you some demographics and some achievement trends and a few things that we know and should act on. And then I will also share with you some of the things that we're doing at the National Education Association. The NEA represents the interests of 2.8 million teachers and education support personnel That number, we're going to be announcing a new number, which will be about 3.3 million. So we're very proud of that, and it's with great pleasure that I'm here to represent the NEA this morning. So about Latino student population growth, we all know that we are the largest minority group in the country. More than 15% of students nationally are Latinos. By the year 2000, forgive me, my data's, yeah, by the year 2025, 25% of all students will be Latino. Already in California and Texas, more than 50% of students are Latino. About half of Latinos students are Spanish dominant, and again, with regard to the number, there's great urgency across the country now to train teachers, to inform communities, to form partnerships to deal with the increase. In the South in particular, for example, in the state of North Carolina, the Latino growth there is 600%. And we are working with teachers who had never had a Latino in their class, and now they're 50 to 60% Latino. The report is good news, bad news. The sobering news is that the achievement gap for Latinos is big, and it remains, the gaps remain very serious from kindergarten through high school. The average NAEP scores for Hispanic students age 17 are well below what they are for white students. Again, both at the kindergarten the dropout rate is high. Governor Wise will share with you the importance of the data when he comes up. But it's 53% of the receive high school diplomas with their class, compared to 75% for white and Asian students. Latinos are another distinction is that 44% of immigrant students will likely to 27% of U.S.-born Latinos. So that's an important distinction. Perspective of every 100 kindergartners that started school this week, 62% are expected to complete high school, 29% will attend college, 10% will obtain at least a bachelor's, and about half will drop out of high school. That's heartbreaking, that's heart-wrenching, and that is very serious. We already know that in America we've lost our competitive edge. All you need to do is look at the engineering numbers. India is producing 600 engineers a year, China 400, and the United States, these are in thousands, 70,000. So we know that we're losing it. And so it is important to educate each and every child. I've got 2 minutes to go. So why do Latinos fare so poorly in school? Well, Latinos fare poorly in school because they are poor. Large numbers of poverty. 28% of Latino students live in poverty. They arrive to school with little health insurance, medical attention, eye care, and other important social services. This is problematic. Many of them do not have access to early childhood education, the programs that indeed were developed to close that gap that poverty brings. Latinos tend to receive inferior education. What do I mean by that? Latinos are less likely to attend preschool. They live in isolated communities. Oftentimes, the American school system is very complex for even those of us that are educated. They're clustered in the poorest schools. They're more likely to have an underqualified teacher, and many times their language needs are ignored. Increasingly, you're hearing state legislatures enacting legislation that excludes immigrant families from receiving social services. That will really complicate the situation for us. So what must we do for Latinos to succeed? Latino children need greater access to quality preschool. They need more time to catch up. We need to reduce their isolation. That is one of the things that the NEA is spending a lot of time on, is building those family community partnerships. We need to better prepare our teachers. Our kids need access to rigorous coursework. And we need to not punish our students because of their parents' immigrant status. We need to provide more access to social services. I have a whole piece on college preparation that I'm hoping my friend Sarita and Ms. Bayan will share with you due to lack of time. And I look forward to your questions. Did I stay on time?
Yeah. Thank you, Rita. Thank you so much for your information. We're delighted to be joined today by former Governor of West Virginia, Governor Bob Weiss, a 9-term member of the House of Representatives. Governor Weiss became the president of the Alliance for Excellent Education in February of 2005. Under his leadership, the Alliance has continued to build its reputation as a respected authority on high school policy and to advocate for reform in America's secondary education system, working to ensure that all students graduate from high school prepared for success. As governor, he fought for and signed legislation to fund the Promise Scholarship Fund, which has helped thousands of West Virginia students remain in the Mountain State for college. In 2001, Governor Weiss proposed salary bonuses for teachers who achieved national board certification, which helped triple the rate of certified teachers in the state. And Education Week's 2004 Quality Counts report gave West Virginia its highest cumulative grade of all 50 states. Please welcome a champion in education, Governor Bob Weiss.
Thank you very much, and I might also add, with respect to the sponsor of this, the driver of a Camry and a Toyota Avalon, which I'm going to talk about later in the context of education. Let me just follow up for a second on Rita's excellent statistical presentation and ask you if you saw a news story last night, because the first day of school for many school districts was yesterday. How many of you saw the story about the 1,725 Latino children who disappeared yesterday? Did you see that? Did you miss that one? You saw the story on Iraq and you saw the story on Congress coming back. You missed that one. My guess is you will miss it tonight, and you will miss it Friday evening as well. But every school day in this country, over 1,700 Latino school children drop out of school. The national total for all children, white, African American, all children, is 7,000 a day. It's almost 1.2, it's around 1.2 million school children do not finish high school. And then you add to that almost 1/3 of our school children will not graduate either college ready or ready for the modern workplace. So we have a system in this country where 2 out of 3 of our children will finish their high school years not prepared for our modern society. Now, if this were Toyota or any manufacturing facility and 2 out of 3 would finish the process not ready to roll, people would be pretty upset about it. And yet that's the situation we're in. Rita talked, her graduation numbers are exactly the ones that we use. Nationally, only 53% of all Latino students will graduate from high school compared to almost 72% of students overall. Very significantly, by the end of high school, Latino students will have math and reading skills that are comparable to white middle school students. So the 12th grader Latino student will have math and reading skills comparable to the 8th grade white student. And I think very significantly in an area where the Alliance for Excellent Education, my organization, which is dedicated to the proposition that all students should graduate from high school either college ready or ready for the modern workplace, we focus heavily on literacy because nationally 70% of all students in 8th grade do not read at grade level. In the case, that's the National Assessment of Education Progress, the only national benchmark there is, the nation's report card as it's known. In this case, though, 71% of students who are English language learners will test considerably below grade level in reading compared to 30% of non-ELL students. So you're an 8th grader, you're getting ready to enter the 9th grade, the high school, with the toughest courses, the content courses, the English, the history, the math, the science, where usually they already think you know how to read and comprehend. You can read a page, you just can't put the thoughts together. You can't comprehend and decode it. Think of how you feel now. And my guess is that's exactly why the bulk of dropouts take place in the 9th and 10th grade. They become either they become very mad, they become very sad, but the result is the same. They're frustrated and they drop out. Now, the statistics do not match up with the expectations that Latino parents and families have for their children. A 2004 survey done by the Pew Hispanic Center reported that 95% of Latino parents understand and say that it is very important that their children go to college. In addition, a majority, 54%, went so far as to say that young people have little chance of success without a college degree. So let's look at the green and then look at the disparity and what we need to do to deal with it. This is not an issue anymore. It's not a Latino issue. It's an American issue because we all need to be moving ahead. Let me get back to that Camry for a second. That Camry is a modern, extremely modern automobile. 35, 40 years ago, actually, when I graduated from high school, I could have come out. I didn't have to graduate from high school in West Virginia to have gotten a good job as a mechanic, to work in the coal mines, the steel mills, or the chemical plants. Today, because we've been doing an analysis of what it takes to work on a modern vehicle, today the person who wants to work on that Camry is going to have to be computer literate, have math skills, certain high-level math skills, communication skills. In other words, is going to require essentially to be college ready. That and I've forgotten whether the Camry existed in 1966. I know the Corolla, or it's 1970. I know the Corolla did. But that Camry today is a far different vehicle, and the person that needs to work on it has a far different skill level need. That's the significance. 90% of the fastest growing jobs in this country require some post-secondary education. So what can you do? There's several things. First of all, and I want to salute so many of the organizations here working in their communities, but we have prepared the elements of a successful high school. It starts at the community level. What are the 10 elements that you should see in a high school, such as personal graduation plans, personal attention for all students, adequate resources, a safe school, skilled teachers, and so on. What are the elements that you need in your high school in order to have success? And we would encourage you to utilize these and to also use our website. Just Google Alliance for Excellent Education, and there we are. This is an important time for this reason, because this next year is very significant at the federal level as well as state and local, because the Congress must take up No Child Left Behind. It expires next year. So in terms of No Child Left Behind, it is an incredibly significant year in addition to what the governors are doing and what the states are doing. There are a number of policy initiatives we can talk about and hope to get into in the question and answer, but I just leave this with you. We can't accept business as usual when it comes to either our education system and particularly our high schools. There's a missing middle at the federal level. We focused resources, as we should have, on early childhood. We recognize the importance, and through Pell Grants, we focus resources on higher ed, but we don't focus resources on middle and high school years, and the result is that we're seeing the results of it. Many of our children are making great gains in early childhood, but you're seeing them regress by the time they get to high school. And so this is a very important time, and certainly to have the Latino community, the Hispanic community so deeply involved as it is critically important. We have a chance to succeed for our high school students, and the time is now. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Governor Weiss. Our next panelist is Dr. Rose Payan, a native of El Paso, Texas, who grew up, as many of us did, speaking 2 languages. Rose has worked as a K-12 speech and language therapist, a classroom teacher, and a consultant. After receiving her PhD in curriculum and instruction, she went to work at the Educational Testing Service in its California office. She has recently moved to ETS Policy Evaluation and Research Center, where she works as a research and policy analyst focusing on English language learners and Latino achievement. In this capacity, she has worked with numerous Hispanic organizations and helped to organize many conferences on Hispanic education issues. Please welcome Dr. Rose Payan.
Thank you. We're at a time where there's a spotlight on educational reform efforts to close the achievement gap, and at the same time where there's much testing that is illuminating the proportions of the gap. Everyone, including the corporate community, is concerned about the achievement gap that exists among racial, ethnic, and students of various economic backgrounds. In the few minutes that I have to address you, I want to talk about the achievement gap, but then hopefully bring a balance to testing. Right now, our Latino students, as other students, are faced with much testing from the state tests for No Child Left Behind, to English proficiency assessments, college entrance exams, AP exams, college placement exams, etc. I believe that as Latinos, this is an opportunity to use the data that is derived by test for our advocacy and our access, and to increase our access. And I'll explain that in a minute. As for the achievement gap, ETS has been studying the achievement gap as we want to be a solution provider to eliminate and eradicate that gap. A few years back, we published a study that we did called Parsing the Achievement Gap, Baselines for Tracking Progress. In this study, we identified factors that create and sustain the gaps in achievement among different groups. Those factors range from birth weight, nutrition, parental involvement in education, curriculum rigor, class size, and teacher quality. And as educators and educational agencies, community members, we may not be able to change or address all these factors, but surely we can support and address the area of teacher quality. Because there's a growing body of knowledge that says that the teacher and teacher effectiveness is the greatest single factor in student achievement. And so it's for this reason that I think that there needs to be a shift in how we view testing. Not only the assessment of learning, which we currently have, but to include the assessment for learning, which I'll explain. You know that testing has many purposes. Tests that we hear about most are the yearly state tests, and those are for accountability and to inform policy, but they don't offer a lot of information to the teacher. These tests are commonly known as summative tests. Did the student learn the standard or did they not? And they're usually given at the end of instruction. And these tests have their place. However, we contend that tests that are used to inform instruction, to assist the teacher in teaching, may have the highest impact on education or student achievement, and thus closing the achievement gap. And these tests are known as formative assessments. Those are the tests that give teacher ongoing information on how to change the teaching so that the students can learn, can continually assess and identify if the teaching that is being given, instruction provided, is coming through. The assessment for learning adjusts this teaching while the learning is taking place. And there's a shift from the focus to teaching to what the student is getting. So I think that this form of assessment for learning, will give us great hope and change teaching practice, build teaching communities, and change student achievement. Now, for the use of tests in access and advocacy. The data that we're getting from testing cannot be ignored as we as Latinos and our population is growing. More than ever, Latinos need to be included in this dialogue about testing, especially parents and of those students that are most affected by testing. We at ETS conduct an annual bipartisan public opinion poll, and we found that the public, Latinos included, generally wants to know more about testing. So a few years back, we launched an initiative at ETS called Let's Talk, where we empower parents and the greater public to look at and utilize assessment data and take the myths out of testing. We have available on our website in both English and Spanish information on how tests are developed, their fairness, how the appropriate use of test results, and how can students and teachers prepare for test. And we've also, and this is most importantly, we've gone to communities. I think the greatest thing in my long life at ETS is when I sat down with a group of parents in educational setting and teachers and actually talked and answered their questions that they had about testing, because they came from cultures where testing is very different. So to explain that, that high school exit exam is supposed to then clue the educator to give the instruction so that that student can graduate, rather than they're done, they're out. So we believe and we're committed to increasing that dialogue. And also, if you have a burning question about testing, you could go on the website, and then our testing experts will answer it. Then our communication people will give it to you in a way that everybody can understand. But I believe that test results are a way to identify what education programs can work for Latino students and which programs cannot. And that data is a vehicle. The testing data is a vehicle for us to see the education that's provided to our Latino students. And finally, I really believe that testing can open doors and can increase access. And why I believe that? Because I'm a product of that. As a high school student, my English teacher said, "You'll never go to college." But my parents believed in education. My brother had started the process. He paid for my SAT. And I remember the day that my high school counselor came and found me and said, "You could go to college." So for me, it was a way of access. It leveled the playing field. I could demonstrate what I could do, and it opened doors. So I hope that you join us and in this conversation about testing, and thank you for your time.
Thank you, Dr. Burnett, for being with us today. It is an honor to now introduce to you our last panelist, an incredible advocate of our community, Sarita E. Brown. She has spent more than 2 decades at prominent national educational institutions and at the highest levels of government, working to implement effective strategies to raise academic achievement and opportunity for low-income and minority students. Ms. Brown started her career at the University of Texas at Austin. She built a national model to promote minority success in higher education. This led to appointments with educational associations in Washington, D.C., and subsequently to federal service as the executive director of the White House Initiative for Educational Excellence for Hispanic Americans under President Clinton and U.S. Secretary of Education Richard Riley. Maintaining her commitment to improving the quality of education, Ms. Brown applied her talent and experience to the non-for-profit sector as founding president of the Hispanic Scholarship Fund Institute and currently as founding president of Excelencia in Education. Please welcome Sarita Brown.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here, and thank you to Mickey Ibarra and Associates in Toyota for bringing these wonderful colleagues together for the conversation that we'll have with you. The 2000 census made it official. For many in this country, they discovered Latinos. News stories in USA Today, Newsweek, and Time magazine started talking about more salsa being sold than ketchup. These arguments are the lighthearted and buzzword kind of ways that Latinos' presence in this country began to be known and felt. In the course of this panel, you've heard more substantive representations of these issues. Human capital. You've heard from Rita, from Governor Wise, these issues of the potential. We sit at a moment in this country where the growth of the Latino community is neither a liability or an asset. It is a projection. And the question is fundamentally, how are we going to respond? These lines that I've just given you, that's my version today. Each of us needs to have in our hip pocket, we can be woken up from a sound sleep and say, the growth of the Latino community is the opportunity for this country, because it is fundamentally a question of human capital. Whether it's the Spellings Commission and the discussion about higher education, whether it's all that will happen in the debate about No Child Left Behind, whether it's assessing the impact of education reform, whether it's the kind of work that my fine colleague Sharon Darling does with family literacy, what we're fundamentally confronting is what will our country, what will our population do? And wherever you are, I come from Texas, so in Texas this has been a well-known fact. In California it is as well. But in Nebraska, in South Carolina, in North Carolina, in Tennessee, wherever you are, the growth of the Latino community is part of the landscape. And therefore, addressing the educational achievement gap is a public policy issue. Now, I'm old school. I come from civil rights, and I'd be happy to talk about social justice, because that's what motivates me. But at this point, in making these arguments and framing the issue, social justice is part of it, but fundamentally, it's how are we going to stay, whether it's globally competitive, whether it's to address every sector of our society. That is the discussion that we're having in terms of addressing Latino student achievement. Now, in discussing that, we have spent today's discussion so far focused on the critical pipeline, having healthy children, making sure that they have rich and robust early childhood experiences, that they start school ready to learn, that they go to well-resourced schools with certified teachers who believe in their future, and that is the work of my fine colleagues. But even as we focus on the pipeline, my job today is to drag that discussion all the way to the end of the pipeline. Because in the same way that we are looking at baby boomers' retirements and the impact that that will have in terms of every sector of society, we're getting ready for a changing of the guard. That is equally true in colleges and university, in the post-secondary sector. The retirements of faculty, just as in every other industry, is what we are confronting. And the fact that Latino PhD acquisition is the same as it was in 1980, despite the growth in raw numbers, the proportion is still 3% of the PhDs granted every year go to Latinos. That is a liability not only for the Latino community, but it is equally a liability for every student who attends the colleges and universities that employ the faculty. Why? Because all students are going to be entering a world, a workforce, a community where the growth of the Latino community will be there. And how you see the world is impacted by your education. So to go through a college experience, be it an associate degree, an undergraduate degree, a BA, and still not see the contributions, the intellectual interests, the capacities of Latinos manifested in an experience with a faculty member leaves you with a skewed view of the world because you are not seeing the very world that you will live in. The statistics about Latino achievement at the post-secondary level are plentiful and equally dim to the kind of statistics that Rose shared with you. We have brought with us materials, and Excelencia in Education, a relatively new nonprofit, was created for the purpose of arming people like yourselves, committed individuals who want to work on this issue with the facts. Fact sheets literally on secondary education, undergraduate and graduate education are available at the table behind you. But I'd like to end with a different reaction to the very compelling question that Rita asked. Why is Latino student achievement poor? Why is it not where it needs to be? That is a question that we all should pursue. At Excelencia, what we're doing is taking that question and saying instead, how are colleges, universities, and communities that are achieving better results doing so? What is it that they're doing? And even more important, how do we grow those strategies? We are examining that in a multitude of ways. You will find publications on our website. We will be producing more in the course of the coming year. But the one that is most timely is Examples of Excelencia. There is a brochure that I encourage you to look at. We sent out a call for nominations throughout the country. We received nominations, over 50, at the associate level, at the baccalaureate level, and at the graduate level. And what we are hearing, what we are seeing, is that even as we struggle with these national statistics, in places right now, people are binding together the tactics, the strategies that my colleagues and you know, and bearing down, achieving results, and making clear that the growth of the Latino community is the growth of this country's strength. Muchísimas gracias.
Thank you, Sarita, for joining us today. At this time, we would like to open the floor for questions to our panelists. I would like to remind you that this is being recorded for rebroadcasting on television, so before you pose your question, please approach the microphone and identify yourself and your affiliation. Questions?
Hi, my name is Alberto Avendaño. I'm associate publisher with El Tiempo Latinos, Washington, D.C. area, Hispanic Weekly, being around for 15 years. The Washington Post discovered us 2 years ago. So now we belong to the big company too. I understand that as minority student population boom and bloom, about 90% of their teachers belong to the so-called white Anglo demographics. Can you comment on that, and also on the fact that teachers, not only Latino students, are dropping out at dramatic rates?
Sarita shared with us a number. I think 3% of university faculty is Latino, and in schools K through 12, only 3% of our teachers are Latino. We all know that we learn better from people that look like us, that speak our language, that understand our values and our culture. And the fact of the matter is we have 15% of our kids are Latino, we only have 3% of our teachers. So it is an issue. One of the strategies that we're employing at the NEA is to teach our members those cultural competencies and to provide training for them on how to teach English language learners. There's a lot of work to be done in that area, but we are expanding many of our programs. We have a minority community outreach program that I'm with that is there to build those relationships with families, schools, communities. It will take all of those entities working together to make a real difference.
In addition to that, one of the important areas is teacher induction, and that is we lose half of our teachers within the first 5 years of going into the classroom. Some of that is because of pay, some of it as well is because of the fact that we don't have good mentoring programs in place to help those teachers develop the skills they need, both to be culturally sensitive, but also to, often they're the ones assigned to the lowest performing schools and the most challenging ones. And so the 16 states that have mentoring programs in place have observed that they have a higher rate of retention, and they're also getting their teachers up to speed, that is to be a quality teacher, even faster. So that's another area that we certainly ought to be looking at.
And to be really controversial, we have a member of our honorary board, Arthur Levine, who has come out very strong in terms of his assessment of schools of education in the country. While his focus is primarily on the dissonance in terms of the capacities that newly minted teachers have and the challenges of the classrooms that they face, I've been advocating that at this moment, isn't it time that those same schools of education see the opportunity in terms of responding to the demographic shifts? So if we talk about leveraging, I think that now is the time, as people look at whether it's renovation, whether it's readjustment, that aligning, making the point that Rita did, that the affinity between teacher and student is part of the learning environment. So we're not making an argument on affirmative action. We're making an argument based on capacity and performance.
Yeah, I'm Charlie Erickson with Hispanic Link News Service here in town. I got a question for a couple of you folks. I hope you'll allow me to ask a few questions to different people. First of all, to Rita, Reg Weaver made a presentation, I think it was yesterday, where he singled out as very important the need for bilingual education teachers. And I wondered what NEA is doing about it to increase that number or to deal with that issue.
Good morning, Charlie. It's good to see you. You look wonderful.
Congratulations.
Thank you. I didn't hear President Weaver's remarks yesterday, but I can tell you that as part of our strategic plan for the next 2 years, we are working hard to increase the number of Latino members, including a pipeline of students studying education and promoting teaching as a profession. Now already, one of the top 3 fields that Latinos go into is education, and we still have that shortage, but we are committed to increasing the number of Latino teachers, and then for those non-Latino teachers to provide them training for teaching English language learners.
Is there any special funding or program that NEA is looking at, like it did for Dropout several years ago, where it gave $1 million a year for 5 years or whatever it was to deal with that issue?
We do offer grants to our state affiliates who have large Latino populations, and we are in fact expanding the targeted sites. We're spending a lot of time in the South already and intend to do that more. The program that I am with is a brand new initiative to reach out to that community, and we are in fact increasing our staff to do that. But at this moment, I don't have $1 million grant, but I like that you asked that question, and I promise you I'll share that with the president.
Good, okay, and for the governor, when you were governor, and since you're now in another position where you have influence in education, what's the most important thing you did for Hispanic students in your state, in West Virginia, and how does West Virginia deal with in-state tuition for students who want to go on to college who are undocumented?
West Virginia has the lowest Hispanic population in the nation. So what I did was, as well as we have one of the lowest African American populations, what I did was to create a panel of students and educators, basically largely students, who were both Hispanic and African American, about what were the particular problems in West Virginia schools that they faced. And they worked for a year and a half to issue a report that is still being used today. In terms of your second question was
dealing with the DREAM Act, basically, or with in-state tuition for students who are undocumented but who went to school in that particular state.
Frank with you, in West Virginia, which has less than a 3% minority population, basically African American, it was simply an issue that didn't come up. And indeed, if I just noticed in the last census report that came out a month ago, is there's only one state that did not gain population in the Hispanic community or have any immigration to speak of, and that was our state. And there was the mountains, and unfortunately in some ways, wall us in. Now my hope is that that's going to be changing and increasing, and diversity is expanding. And indeed, West Virginia, I believe, is a very, very good place to live, and I hope people will find it such.
Of course, if you have good jobs, then the Latinos find you. I guess you.
No, that's absolutely the largest challenge, and happily in West Virginia, we've made some gains there. And I might note that the significance of Toyota is our largest automotive manufacturer in West Virginia, providing some of the best paying jobs. And the key for our students is, and it's the key, I think, for many companies, not just Toyota, but the key is that as the workforce my age retires, then who is it that's going to be coming in to fill those jobs that are very complicated and complex? We want to keep those jobs, and we want to expand them in West Virginia. We can't do it without a good educational system, and particularly in the high school years.
Thank you. And I guess finally, maybe to Rita and Sarita, both dealing with No Child Left Behind, and what do you think it has accomplished for Hispanic students? What do you think it failed to accomplish with regard to LEP students or other students who could not necessarily or were not taking the tests in English? And what do you think needs to be done so that it adequately addresses the needs of Hispanic students? And anybody else I hope you'll wade in on DREAM Act or any other question too.
Since Excelencia's scope is post-secondary education, you're getting an answer from me as opposed to from the organization. I think the one, for Latino students, one benefit has been the implementation as practice, the use of disaggregated data. I think that while there are many schools, perhaps not school districts, but schools who find it difficult to raise up to awareness the performance of subpopulations, and then the more nuanced kind of analysis, such as Rose was describing and others. I think making it practice and required has been very successful. In terms of how it has instructed schools to deal with English language learners, it has put it on the agenda, and it has done so in a way that, again, compels educators to respond to it. The difficulty has been, though, that the emphasis has been on looking at the data and in the reporting and in untangling the practices of testing and the rest of it. And from afar, the schools that need help the most are schools that are really having to decide, do you invest resources in what are fundamentally, for them, compliance issues, while the physical plant is falling apart, while you don't have the teachers that you need, you don't have the resources to offer those teachers. And my commentary, Sarita Brown commentary on No Child Left Behind, is that we have not dealt with that fundamental issue of fairness and the distribution of resources. The question about the segregation of Latino students into the poorest funded schools has not been impacted at all by NCLE.
Thank you. And I guess I meant Rose. I think I said Rita. Go ahead.
I think that the inclusion of English learners and states having to be responsible for them and counting them and including them in the testing process is major. Also, because then what we count, we value, and we acknowledge, and now we have to own up and educate. The other thing is, an outcome has been the tests that were available commercially to identify proficiency were in question, many of the commercial tests. And we've just now, state consortia have come together and have been funded to create new state assessments that are being used. The states are required now to have state English proficiency assessments, and there are 4 new ones. We have to now study what the psychometric properties are, but I think it's a new time, and it brings the English learner issue to the forefront, and one that we need to discuss, and we need to, as Rita said, to train all teachers, because it's not just a California, Texas, Florida thing now, but English learners are in every state. And to train all teachers in adequate methodology in training English learners, educating English learners, understanding second language acquisition, and understanding the difference between learning English and learning academic concepts.
Am I correct that a lot of school districts or states did not have to even test the non-English speaking kids, and obviously if you don't test them, you don't find out what the problem is, and if you don't find out what the problem is, you can't solve it. Has that been improved under the new Secretary of Education, or is that or do you have high hopes with now that we have an undersecretary who is Latina?
Well, now that there's a definition for English learners, they have to be counted by states, and they have to have a state assessment, and they're included in the accountability process and included in the annual, yearly process of the states.
I think it's important to point out, though, that applies to a point, and that's the point. If I could leave you with nothing else, it's No Child Left Behind does not apply effectively to high schools. It was never designed to be a high school bill. When the president introduced it, he mentioned high schools twice. The Congress added some language with 2 prime examples. All the importance, and we all agree, I believe, on the importance of disaggregating the data so that we know exactly what populations are affected. That applies all the way through up until graduation. And while it's indefinite, unclear in the statute, the way the department has interpreted the graduation rate is that effectively you don't have to be looking at the disaggregated aspects of it, and there are no sanctions that follow it. So you run the mile, and you're measured at every step of the way until whether or not you cross the finish line. The second thing is to remember, with No Child Left Behind, the testing requirement is grades 3 through 8 with 1 grade in high school, usually in the 10th grade. And so, and the third is this: the carrot and the stick to No Child Left Behind is Title I or Title I dollars. Well, 80-some% of Title I dollars are in grades K through 5, another 10 to 15% in middle school. The result is that only 7% of high school students are covered by, that effectively get Title I dollars, meaning that there are no sanctions that really apply to high schools. Now, our message, the Alliance for Excellent Education, is with No Child Left Behind having to be renewed in the next 2 years, well, it expires in 2007, is whether or not you put high schools in it isn't as important to us as that you recognize the significant challenges that high schools face, that students of color face within those high schools, and you do something about it.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Just one last thing, Charlie. You're going to hear a lot from the NEA on NCLD with regard to English language learners, funding, testing, a whole series of issues. But it is a good thing that the data has been disaggregated, because the focus is on these students.
Great. Let me issue each of you an invitation that the Hispanic Link News Service syndicates 3 columns a week to about 300 newspapers now, both in English and Spanish, and we'd love to talk to any of you if you'd like to write a column for us on some particular aspect of educating Hispanic children. It's a high priority to us, and I'm glad to see that we've got a nice body up here prepared to come up with some suggestions and answers. We also have a bunch of links back. We put them back on the back table. Hope you'll pick some up, all of you, before you depart. Thanks again.
Thank you.
I was wondering what you might comment on in terms of the gaps in research that you might see and how that connects with gaps in policy, especially as it relates to Latino education.
Having just spent this morning with my colleague, Deborah Santiago, who is our Vice President for Policy and Research and is the research arm at Excelencia, I think there's two kinds of gaps. One is in content, and I'll give you our quick list. But the other, which is the reason why Excelencia does its work, is the translation of what findings exist, what research has been produced, the translation of that into information for practical use and for potential policy. So let me talk about that one first, because that's generic, and I'll give you our list of key issues, and I'm sure that there are many others. Having now done this for 2 years in a very active way, sitting down face to face with academic researchers, it is a real bridging exercise, and it's one that all of us who care about this issue need to be patient, but also be very intentional and stubborn. The very protocol of academic research is to hold itself apart from the real world. And therefore, there is enormous amount of queasiness, discomfort by academic researchers in answering the fundamental question, ¿y qué? I mean, that's really interesting. I'm very glad to, but what do we do with that? And they're very scholarly training, and standing as an academic makes them loath to answer the question. So what we all need to do, and I don't think this is just for Latino issues, this is generally, is support the enterprises that exist and grow them that allow academics and scholars to offer their findings and then forge some level of working relationship with policy translators. Not necessarily people who have an agenda and are going to cherry pick research for, okay, we'll make that support our position, but instead they are the individuals. In fact, I would argue to say we are individuals who would be the consumers, the users of research, and could then say, this is what we think your journal article, this is what your manuscript suggests, could then be a practice, a recommendation for whether it's at the college or university level, whether it's in public policy. So that enterprise is the one that I think we are all living through right now, and it is a challenge. There are existing organizations, think tanks, and other groups, but even they create boundaries for what they will say definitively. And it leaves the general public, I think, in a real quandary, because the rhetoric of what we're doing right now makes it sound as if there's a real science. And the truth of the matter is that it's more artistry than science. It isn't that there will be an experiment that will give us the magic bullet and then poof, it gets implemented. There will be findings that will give us indications. But at the implementation level, It's the marriage of the ability, and you know this, it is the marriage of the ability of the leaders, of the administrators, of the educators to take the practices, the pedagogy, the styles, the strategies, and then apply it, and then build in a system of assessment. So, thank you for that commercial, because that is the enterprise of Excelencia. In terms of research for us, I think the key ones have to do with the learning environment at the post-secondary level. What we are focused on right now is not so much our discussions about what are the entry-level criteria, and then what are the retention rates and what are the graduation rates, only because those kinds of things exist. It has much more to do with what is it that we can study about the learning environments in the very disparate kinds of post-secondary environments. The commuter experience student at a community college, and what are the strategies there that are advancing not just their enrollment, but their successful transition to a four-year institution or to the acquisition of a four-year degree. What is it that we can look and examine and replicate in terms of the successful experiences of Latinos who have gone on for PhDs? Not the idiosyncratic hero stories, which are very important, but those are hard to leverage and go to scale. How do we look at the institutional, using research to ferret out the institutional practices or community building relationships that have then fostered those kinds of learning environments? And this is a question I would probably go on and on about. So let me just say that from Excelencia's standpoint, we will be preparing and making available on our website the research agenda as it relates to Latino student success in post-secondary institutions.
Thank you, Sarita. In closing, I'd like to thank our panelists, Rita Jaramillo, Governor Weiss, Dr. Payan, and Sarita Brown, for the valuable information that you shared with us today. Learning about your organizations and your work and dedication makes us definitely sleep better at night. Your leadership is greatly appreciated. I would also like to again thank the sponsors, Toyota, for your commitment to the Latino community and for making this event possible. Thank you, Robert. Thank you, Sharon, for being here with us today. I'd also like to thank Noreli Garcia with Mickey Barr and Associates. She's responsible for coordinating and doing everything to make this possible. So thank you so much, Noreli. Thank you so much for joining us today. Thanks.